Rabbi Soloveichik, we are meeting to speak just after the tail end of an unbelievable 2-week period in Jewish history and Zionist history and the history of the West. And I think that as we try to think theologically and religiously about this moment, there's a very old theological debate about the extent to which events in the world change the way that we conceptualize God, something about the human consciousness and our religious sense, which is revealed by the events of the world. And in the Jewish world, in the Jewish story of modern times, there are these moments. There's the Six-Day War. There's the strike in Osirak. There are these moments when the Israel's defense forces have done things that have revealed something about the way that Jews think and feel and believe. And I want to just begin by asking you if you think this is one of those moments.
Thank you, John. Hello from a hotel room in an undisclosed location overseas. It's wonderful to be speaking with you. And before I address the truly awe-inspiring moment in which we find ourselves, I do just want to first note the fact that, of course, we bear in mind those that have been murdered in Israel by the evil attacks of the Iranian regime. And that we pray not only that their memory will be a blessing, but also that Hashem Yikom Damam, that God will avenge their blood, and that we will not forget them. And now, to turn to your question, I'd like to answer it with reflections that are in part inspired by a wonderful op-ed in the Wall Street Journal by Amit Segal, the absolutely terrific reporter from which we've been learning so much in the recent weeks. Amit wrote an article about Begin, which of course I was immediately excited to see. And what he wrote about was the Begin doctrine, that what has truly been embraced in recent days was the principle that Begin enunciated as an explanation for the Osirak operation, which is that no country that is an existential enemy of Israel will be allowed by the Jewish state to attain nuclear weapons and thereby threaten Israel in an existential way. Now, he's absolutely right to note this Begin doctrine and its importance to the events that have unfolded over the past 2 weeks. But I think that what we've seen instantiated here and embraced here is another Begin doctrine, by which I mean the very doctrine that set Begin apart from all previous prime ministers of Israel, and really what marked him as unique as a Zionist leader, which is Begin's assertion constantly that in the story of Zionism, we see simultaneously the importance of Jewish self-defense and also providence made manifest, that the two actually go hand in hand. That, to paraphrase Milton Himmelfarb's symposium contribution and commentary after the Six-Day War, the Jewish people in the story of Zionism are not only actors, but are also, in a mysterious, miraculous way, acted through. And the amazing thing, John, is that those most publicly recognizing this in the past 2 weeks were not only theologians or rabbis or spiritual leaders. We saw this Begin doctrine expressed and embraced by those who don't usually speak this way. Thus, we saw Prime Minister Netanyahu say in his press conference that something to the effect of that the most important member of his Knesset coalition, or the most important member of the Knesset, was Siyata Dishmaya, which is a traditional Talmudic term for providence, literally the help of God. I can't remember Prime Minister Netanyahu ever speaking this way. And then, of course, we saw this reflected from a very different perspective, describing not Zionism, but the American role in this operation, reflected in President Trump's live address. And you have to see it from, if you will, for a moment, from the perspective of a religious American Jew who will have come right out of saying Havdalah and saying farewell to the Shabbat and basically not hearing any news for 24 hours and going straight to President Trump's address and to see his description of all that unfolded. And then
his address, in which we learned that Operation Midnight Hammer had sent B-2 bombers from the United States to destroy Fordo and other nuclear sites in Iran.
Exactly. And I should add to that, John, now that you mentioned it, that someone noted online that there is a traditional liturgical piece that is sung at the Seder, Vayhi b'chatzi halayla, and it was at midnight, or it happened at midnight, which picks up on the many miraculous, earth-shattering events that occurred in the Bible precisely at midnight. It's a phrase that we see first with the plague of the firstborn and the beginning of the Exodus. But then again, midnight is invoked in the story of the defeat of the Assyrian Empire when it surrounds Jerusalem, the empire of Sancherib during the reign of Hezekiah. And so to hear the president speak of an operation that is named for midnight is to immediately remind the Jewish people of providence and of the Almighty's activity in world events. And so then we saw the president describe this in obviously in words composed by a speechwriter, but then I believe probably going off script, as the president is wont to do, he concluded by saying, "We love you, God," as if to say that he too was overcome by awe at his role in this moment. And I want to stress, John, that when I say that providence is invoked by leaders that don't often speak this way, I don't mean it as a criticism. I noted in my book, Providence and Power, that in general, great statesmen in history, because they are so focused on the bold action that is necessary for statesmanship, it's very rare that is balanced with a recognition of God acting through them, or of providence making itself manifest. This is not a theme that we find, for example, in the way Churchill spoke. Churchill didn't end his addresses to Parliament, even at the most important moments in his premiership, with the words, "We love you, God." That's just not the way he spoke. And he didn't speak of whatever the British version of Siyata Dishmaya would have been. It's just not. He was a great statesman, but his emphasis on bold action was so central to his identity that that's the entirety of who he was. Or as my friend Andrew Roberts put it, Churchill believed in God, but he believed that God's plan was largely centered on preserving and protecting Winston Churchill. Right. Yeah. So, but here we see two people, Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump, that are, I think we can safely say, not known for their lack of confidence in their abilities, and yet invoke what can only be described as awe. And so it's that element of, if you will, the Begin doctrine, by which I mean Begin's description of Zionism in particular, and history in general, as a reflection of providence. Yehuda Avner describes in his memoir how right after Osirak, Prime Minister Begin met with the Jewish lay leader and activist Max Fisher. And Fisher asked him, "Are you a man of faith?" And in Avner's recollection, Begin says something to the effect of, "If you mean, am I a mystic? No. But if you are asking, do I believe in Elokei Yisrael, in the God of Israel, the answer is unequivocally yes." And then Begin said, "How are we to explain that these planes flew to Osirak and none of them were harmed, and that all the pilots returned safely? Only a miracle can explain this." Does that take away from the boldness of Begin's decision? No. And of course, this doesn't take away from the boldness of Netanyahu's decision or of President Trump's decision. But when these two men react with awe to what has unfolded, that is when Begin's doctrine lives. That is really when Menachem Begin lives.
Not only in the insistence that Israel's stated adversaries cannot have the power to eliminate the Jewish state, but indeed in recognizing the simultaneous human and extra human or beyond human presence,
That's right.
providential presence in human action.
That's exactly. Both aspects are testaments to Begin's legacy, because, of course, when Begin first struck Osirak at the time, it was so unprecedented that people didn't even believe that it happened. And of course, both the United States and the UK criticized, and these were, the administrations of serious leaders, Reagan and Thatcher, and their administrations criticized Israel. Now, of course, when Netanyahu acted, it was important and it seized everyone's attention, but no one was shocked in that way. And the same is true, of course, when President Trump acted. This was not shocking because with time, the wisdom of Begin's action came to be understood, not only in Israel, but beyond. And that aspect lived. But what also lived at the same time was his providential approach to history, and how a belief in providence can actually go hand in hand with bold action. That's what we're seeing in these past 2 weeks.
Rabbi Soloveichik, I do want to go back because to me, the paradigmatic example in terms of the consequences of a short period of time for the Jewish people, for Jewish history, for Zionist history, I think that the Six-Day War looms large in the way that I think about how momentous these last 2 weeks have been. And one of the consequences of the Six-Day War was an enormous galvanizing effect in the Jewish consciousness of American Jews, of Israelis, that Jerusalem was reunited, that all of a sudden Jewish sovereignty again laid over Jerusalem, and there's something biblical seemed to be happening. And I wonder if one can detect similar kinds of galvanizing effects because of the last 2 weeks.
Yes, I think it's too soon. I think it's too soon to tell. We have seen, of course, in the past very difficult year and a half, which has also, even before the events over Iran, featured some truly awe-inspiring events, including the neutralization of Hezbollah and all that was involved in those moments, a galvanizing of Jewish awareness and Jews pondering why they are in the headlines all the time. Why is everyone focused on the Jewish people? Why is everyone focused on one small sliver and of land and one tiny people? Why is the world always seized with a fascination for good or for ill with the Jews and with the Jewish state? Many Jews have already begun to ponder that. And for those Jews, I think the past 2 weeks will only further deepen their reflections on their identity and on the Jewish story. But will this moment shock into awareness those who have not been shocked during all that's already unfolded? That I can't say.
By the way, what is your own, if you had to venture an answer to the question of the world's fascination at moments of high activity like this one with the Jewish state? You could say, well, it's because of the military situation. It's because of the war. But of course, other wars don't occupy the same place in the moral imagination of so many Americans, of so many people around the world. There does seem to be something different about it. And I wonder if you have an answer for that.
So the truth is that this fascination is one that has been long-standing. It existed before October 7th, and at times it can make itself manifest in good ways, and at times it can make itself manifest in distressing ways. But it is long-standing because deep down everybody knows that just based on the usual laws of nature or the quote unquote laws of history that we are used to, this makes no sense. It makes no sense that this tiny country exists. It makes no sense that it has achieved what it has achieved. And everyone is fascinated with it for that reason. Look, John, even in September of 2023, you had governments all over the world issuing their own view on the Knesset's debate about judicial reform.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine? Can you imagine the British government offering its views on the debate about judicial reform in a country, in any other country that has 9 million people,
Right.
anywhere else on earth? The very question sounds ludicrous. It wouldn't offer its view on a debate about this matter taking place in Spain, which has many more people than 9 million.
Right.
But everyone feels some way as if what is taking place is of world importance because deep down they know that there is something either awe-inspiring or, if you're taking a negative approach to this, odd about this state and its story.
I mean,
And of course,
I've heard you say, I've heard you in your own teaching, in your own lecturing, in your own writing, you have expressed it something like this, that look, there was a people that marched into history at some time and said, God has, the creator of the heaven and the earth, has a special covenantal relationship with us. And on the basis of this, the nations of the world will be blessed as they bless us, and they will be cursed as they curse us. And for all time, we will have this exceptional fulcrum role in history. And that might have seemed absurd. It might seem absurd to some ears now. And it might have seemed absurd when Abraham and then his children and then Moses said something like that. But now history has come to show that it's kind of true. And that scandalizes people. And the counterintuitive, interesting fact is that some of the people who witness this truth more clearly than anyone else are Israel's adversaries.
And that's exactly right. And the truth is, it's always been true. Because in the end, one's conscious or unconscious reaction to Jewish history is always, why are they still here? And one can react to that with awe or with envy and hate. And the latter group have always targeted whatever embodies in that period the miracle of Jewish endurance. So if Jews are exiled and spread around the world, they will target ritual objects that embody their eternity. They will spread blood libels about, say, matzah and other reflections of Jewish faith and the persistence of Jewish faith. The state of Israel, as I said after October 7th, is the matzah of today. It is the greatest embodiment in our age, or the most public, by greatest I mean the most public and obvious embodiment of the miracle of Jewish persistence and of the vindication, really, of Jewish claims about themselves and about the biblical claims about the Jews. And what's wondrous, John, actually is, and we need to remind ourselves how wondrous this is that today there are many, many, many millions of non-Jews, especially in the United States of America, that recognize this. I think what will remain with me always, I think when I describe to future generations what it was like to be following online the news about the launch of Operation Amkalavi Akum. What I'm going to remember, perhaps above all, is not statements from Netanyahu and not the news reports, but tweets from non-Jewish leaders in America. So what sticks most in my mind is just a tweet from the governor of Alabama, which just said 4 words: Alabama stands with Israel. And I thought to myself, how would I explain this tweet to an ancestor of mine that lived, I don't know, in Kovno or Vilna 200 years ago? I have to explain to them, first of all, what Alabama is.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And that this governor is not saying this because of the enormous Jewish constituency in Alabama.
Right.
Nor is this governor saying it because what's unfolding in the Middle East has enormous implications for domestic issues, state
right.
issues.
The economy of Alabama. Yeah.
The economy of Alabama is not going to be massively impacted by the future security of the state of Israel. And yet, the governor of Alabama was saying it not only to reflect the view, not only in order to express the views of that governor, but to reflect the views of the constituency of that governor. And how would you even explain that to somebody who lived 200 years ago? A Jew, I mean, who lived 200 years ago. I don't even know how any one of them would have been able to wrap their heads around it, except to say that it is a partial fulfillment, because of course, obviously, not everyone on earth feels this way, of what is described in the Psalms. Az yomru v'goyim, higdil Hashem la'asoti melech. They will say amongst the nations, God has done great in his actions with this people. And so there is actually a deep sense of inspiration that is found in Israel's story from so many non-Jews, and a wonder at Jewish history in toto that is expressed by many non-Jews in America. Well, and we in turn have to respond with profound gratitude to that as Jews.
Indeed we do. But what you just said is I think the most profound theological point that one can draw out of these last days is that it is another testament to the God of Israel that keeps his promises in history. And when there is a covenantal promise that Israel will endure forever, that here we have a nation that's 1/10 of the size of its adversary, or 1/9 the size of its adversary, that nevertheless can turn its most lethal weapons into dust, now in partnership with the United States, but nevertheless that there's something inexplicable about that without recourse to God's providence. And therefore the God who keeps his promises in history to his chosen people, if you're listening to that as a Christian, maybe you think, well, that's a God who keeps his promises in general. And it could be a galvanizing moment for Christianity too.
Well, I think that those that remain inspired by Israel's story, meaning non-Jews of faith, see in Israel the greatest argument for God's existence in contemporary times. And precisely because so many people of faith feel that they are often swimming upstream against a hostile zeitgeist, that now in embracing concepts like providence, they are actually countercultural.
Mm-hmm.
They find in Israel's story a sustaining source of inspiration. And I have to say that in turn, seeing that, I myself continue to be awed at the story of America, which reflects its own connection to biblical inspiration in so many ways throughout its history. And it certainly reflected that over the past 2 weeks, which, of course, is why for those in America that dislike that about America, we've seen such a frenzied and angry reaction to all that has occurred. But it is that aspect of America that has truly reflected itself. Not only, as it's been said, the quote unquote, it's not merely what some would describe as a Jacksonian aspect of America, an admiration of strength when it's made manifest against enemies of America, which is, of course, an admiration of strength made manifest against enemies of America is indeed appropriate. But it's more than that. There is a deeply religious awe that is actually being reflected by some. And belief in providence and a look to the story of biblical Israel as a source of teaching about providence in history has always been a theme in the American story. And we've seen that reflected in many Americans today.
Rabbi Soloveichik, I want to change the subject and ask you about a darker, more confusing element of the last 2 weeks, which extends considerably before the last 2 weeks. I think that one can explain the achievements of the IDF and the achievements of the American Air Force in Iran as an extension of, as a consequence of October 7th. That somehow a chain of events that began on October 7th led to this moment. Of course, October 7th was a day of unbelievable Jewish suffering. Is it appropriate to see some kind of redemptive aspect to the neutralization of Israel's existential threat over the last 2 weeks as a response somehow to all of that suffering?
The way I would approach it is that the memory of horrific events that occur in Jewish history, whether those that are fresh in our minds because they only occurred in the last year and a half, or whether those that live on in our minds because we refuse to forget them and constantly commemorate them. The mourning for those moments do not go away. But the memory of those events also deepen our appreciation of the glorious moments in Jewish history when they occur, and render those moments more profound. The shattering of a glass at a Jewish wedding, at a chuppah, is meant, as traditionally understood, to mark the many shatterings of Jewish history. And we do that because we refuse to forget all that has occurred in our past. But it also renders the joy at what is occurring in the chuppah, which is embodying covenantal endurance and continuity, more profound. The example I've been giving recently is not from a Jewish source, but it's from Japanese art and pottery, which is the art form known as kintsugi, in which Japanese artists take shattered pottery and piece them together, utilizing gold lacquer, so that the scars are not effaced or forgotten, but actually made a part of the existence of the pottery restored. And in that way, the scars of Jewish history are not forgotten at all. To say that they are they are part of who we are would be an understatement. And we will never forget what occurred on October 7th now, any more than we will forget the other horrific events of the Jewish past. But constantly reconsidering the fragile nature of Jewish history allows us to better appreciate the salvific moments and how precious they actually are.
And
both go hand in hand.
And obliges us to try to take part in them.
As it obliges us to give gratitude when they occur. There is a well-known Talmudic statement which is about one of the greatest and most miraculous moments in Jewish history, which was the defeat of the Assyrian army surrounding Jerusalem after the Assyrian Empire had already swallowed up 10 out of 12 tribes. And all of Jewish existence was on the line. And Hezekiah, the king in Jerusalem, who had shown such faith in God and merited the salvation, after it occurred, failed to express his gratitude to God in that very moment. And the Talmud comments that had he only given gratitude at that precise point, then he would himself have been the Messiah. And Jewish history would have come to its foretold conclusion. Evil would have been forever defeated and the world entirely redeemed. And the point, of course, is that gratitude for Jewish history is especially incumbent upon us in moments like these. It does not remove our mourning for October 7th any more than it will remove our mourning for the precious souls that were murdered this morning by Iran's deliberate strike on a civilian domicile. That mourning will continue, but it's precisely because we are a people that refuse to forget that our appreciation of miraculous moments are rendered all the more profound and deepened in the experience.
Rabbi Soloveichik, thank you.
Thank you, John.